Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 206 today. We're moving up the complexity level, trying to do some more complex objects. I'm starting to expect more and more of you, but that is the nature of the class. In order to be able to model complex things, we have to get there somehow. So today we're moving away from the basic kind of boxes and lofted shapes that we've been doing. And we're going to start working today with kind of tubes and circular objects and donuts and those kinds of things because we're kind of moving in that direction. The good news is that I think it's very achievable to get these kinds of results. And as we trickle it into your abilities, you'll be able to start using it more and more as we go forward. So today I call this Modeling Components Part 2. The truth is that this is building modeling skills, really. Is what we're doing. And so we'll go through today and talk about some new skills. Of course, there will be older skills that we'll reinforce, and we'll keep stacking on top of each other. We will revisit V-Ray again soon, but we have to keep modeling in Rhino first. I would like to remind all of you that next Monday is a holiday. Some of you are well aware of that. If you show up here, guess what? I won't be here, so we won't have class. But that's good. As I said to my morning class, the nice thing about the spring semester is the holidays are kind of dispersed. They're not just Thanksgiving at the end and then you panic. It works a little nicer. So Monday's a holiday. Nothing to worry about on Monday. We'll come back on Wednesday and keep going at it. Okay, so today we're going to start in the top view, as we've been doing, drawing a set of guidelines. And how you choose to draw this really is up to you. The little drawing on the side here says that we basically have a 2-inch radius arc, a 13-inch length piece, and then a 2-inch radius arc at the end. And so we have a couple different options for how we create the arc in the first place or how we draw this. You could, for example, start with a polyline at some point like this, 13 inches long, and then you could draw an arc from the end. Notice that we have different arc tools. Thus far, I've had to use the arc start, end, and direction at start. But we could also use an arc with a center, a start, and an angle. So for example here, this would be center of arc. We'd have to go down 2 inches to get the center. And we go there and there, for example. If I was using a different arc tool, say the start and the end and the radius, right? I could do the start, and then the end would be, I could use relative coordinates at 2 inches, comma, negative 2 inches, and then my radius would be 2 inches, and that would create that side. So there's a lot of different ways of creating this. If I started with the arc, right, again, I can choose any one of these as my option. Let's say I did the center, the start, and the angle. If I did that, my initial coordinate would be 2 over, so it would be 2, comma, 0 to start. And I didn't do the @ sign because it's not relative to anything. It's relative to the absolute plane. And so we could do 2 inches here, and then we could go to right there to create the first one. So again, part of the reason I'm showing you a variety of ways of doing it is you, as you learn in Rhino and as you start to draw in Rhino, will find there's certain ways that you like to do things. And just because I like to do things a certain way doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. And that's part of why I like to show you different options. So I'm going to go over 13 inches here, like that. And believe it or not, there is a reason that it's this weird size, because we're going to rotate it at a 45-degree angle, and it'll fit on a 1 foot by 1 foot little grid. Anyway, so and then I'll finish that, and I'll do one more arc, and I'll come over here. This time I'll do this other arc. So I have a start of arc. The end is going to be relative at 2 inches, comma, negative 2 inches. There it is. And my radius is going to be 2 inches in that direction. And there it is. So I have the arc, the straight piece, and the end arc. Before I move on, I do want to join these 3 curves together. So I'll select all 3 and go up to Edit, Join, or I'll type Join on the keyboard. And those 3 curves will be joined into one curve. Okay? So from here, I'm going to switch from the top view into the perspective view so that I can see that little curve. And I'm going to rotate this curve so that it's standing up in the third dimension. Right? So right now it's laying flat on the ground plane. And I want it to come up into the third dimension. And I'm going to use the rotate 3D command, which is Rhino 5.6, which we've been using over and over again, but we'll do it again here. So I can type rotate 3D, or I can go to the transform menu and select rotate 3D. And I'll select my object to rotate, which is obviously the curve that I've drawn. I'll press enter. And then my rotation axis is just going to be right here along the x-axis. So it's at the bottom. So I'll go from here to there. And then my reference point will be going up the y-axis. And I'll be able to fold this so that it's up in the third dimensions like that, which is exactly what I'm after. Okay, so now I'm going to use the circle command, which is right here. Right, looks like a circle. It doesn't matter which. Again, there's multiple circles. I'm just going to pick the first one with the center. And it's going to ask me for the center of the circle. So it's going to be right there. And now I have the ability to choose either the diameter or the radius. And so I've asked you, I've given you a measurement of 1/2 inch for the diameter. We want to make sure that it says diameter, and then I type in my value. If yours says radius, there, you either have to cut the value in half, so it would be 1/4 inch, or you can click on diameter or type D to switch to diameter mode, and then we'll say 0.5 inches, and we get a little circle right there. Okay? So all of this geometry that I've been creating is designed to be the construction pieces for a tube. Basically, I want there to be a tube that comes up on a radius, goes straight along the top, and then curves back down to the ground. And so that's a rather hard object to create out of thin air, but if I have a few guidelines, namely the cross-section and what's called a rail, I can use a command called a sweep to make this tube for me. Right? And so I'm going to do, the first one that I'm going to do is called a sweep one rail. And it's available under Surface, Sweep One Rail. The key command is just Sweep One. And when I select Sweep One Rail, it's going to say Select Rail first. So the rail is obviously this. Right? You can think of it as a railroad track. And then it immediately, I don't have to hit Enter or anything. It'll say Select Cross-Section Curve. So the cross-sectional curve is this circle that's available for me there. Okay? When I'm done, notice I could press more than one cross-sectional curve. When I'm done, I only have one. I'll hit Enter. And it'll again give me the drag seam to adjust. Right? This is just like when we did the loft if we cared about where the seam was. In this case, the default is just fine. Right? I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And at this point, it will give me a preview of what this tube is going to look like. I'm going to switch into shaded mode so we can see the preview of it in shaded mode. But essentially, there's my tube. Right? Starts here, goes up, runs along there, and then comes back down, which is the whole idea. Now, I have a variety of other options available to me under the Sweep One Rail options. The style here is freeform, which is great for creating a pipe, but not so good if we wanted to create like a road or something like that. For creating a road, we have something called road-like top, which is generally what you're going to use, and I'll show you an example of that in just a second. Below this, we have some other options. Generally speaking, all of the default options are just fine, and we'll go ahead and say OK. When we do that, you see that I now have basically a pipe that curves up, goes straight, and curves back down. Okay? So let's talk in a little bit more detail about how the sweep works. I'm going to do some other examples and depart from the step-by-step of what we're doing, and we'll come back to this object in just a second. Okay? So let's say that I have a curve, and I'm going to draw a curve here. Oops. Turn off ortho for a second. And let me draw this in the top view for just a second here. Off in space. Okay, so let's say I had a little curve. I'm also, while I'm here, I'm going to draw another curve close to it in places, and farther away from it in other places because I'll end up using them both. Okay? So let's say I have those two curves, and then I'm also going to copy these two curves and do another set of these curves. Let me turn my points on. And what I'm doing right now doesn't matter so much. I just want to show you what happens here a little bit. Okay, so we'll start with these two curves, which are perfectly flat. Okay? Now, if I wanted to create a tube along this, for example, that would not be a problem. I can start a circle at the center here, and again, my dimensions don't really matter. Now, in this case, the cross-sectional curve is not perpendicular to the curve or even in the right plane, so I do need to do a little quick rotate 3D so that I can make this. Let me do it a little bit more vertical. Right, I'm just trying to put it like that. Okay. Now, I can do the same sweep 1. So let me go to Surface, Sweep 1 Rail. And this curve is much more freeform than the one I created. But if I select that as the rail, and that is my cross-section curve, right, there's the seam, it will make, right, I guess in that case it's more of a snake. But it follows along, right, exactly the way I want it to. Okay? But I'm not limited to having a shape that is circular in its nature. I could instead, right, let's draw, say, a little box. And I'm going to save myself a little time and just draw the box in the side view here. Right, something like this. And do a quick little rotate of this. Okay, so instead of this being the cross-section, right, notice also that the rail is not in the center of the object on this one. Doesn't matter where the rail is in relation to the object. We'll stay a consistent distance apart. Let me go to Surface, Sweep 1 Rail. Again, there's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve. And now it builds like a flat object. So it doesn't matter what the cross-sectional curve is. The cross-section could be a star. It could be some kind of a blob. It makes no difference, right? It just follows along. Now, let's take this up another step. Okay, let me take this. Let me draw a quick rectangle between these two curves. And let me draw it straight down. I'm going to draw it a little bit thicker so you can see the difference. Okay? So I now have a curve that goes between those two curves. And if I were to sweep one rail, as we've been doing, with this is the rail, that is my cross-section, I'd end up with a consistent little snake-like, duct-like object. Okay? Notice that in this corner I'm getting a little bit of weird pinching, right, because the corner is kind of tight, and the angle at which this object starts at. If I rotated it, I would get less of that. Anyway, instead of sweeping one rail, I could also sweep two rails. So let's save this object for comparison here for just a second. Okay, so there it is. Now let's sweep two rails. So I'm going to go up to Surface, Sweep two rails. This time it says select the first rail. Okay, then it's going to say select the second rail. Let's say I did this as my second rail. Okay, select cross-section curves. There's the cross-section curve. Now when I do this, this sweep is no longer going to be, the seam's fine, the sweep is no longer going to be tied to one curve. It's going to grow or shrink in size based on how close or how far away the various curves are from each other. So you can see that it gets bigger and smaller. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So let's take this yet another step further, right? And I'm going to move over to this set of objects. So let's say that again I'm going to draw a little box between these objects. Because they're getting farther away from each other. So the cross-sectional curve gets bigger the further away and smaller the closer they are. It stayed, because both of them were in the same plane, the top, which was set at the same plane, stays the same in the bottom. If the cross-section had been moved up, it would get bigger and smaller on both the top and the bottom, and the middle would stay the same. Okay, so let's come back here to this view. Okay, now in this context, right, I have two curves, one of which goes up and then comes back down. Right? So let's say that I did just a sweep one rail. So I'll go to surface, sweep one rail. There's my rail, which goes up and down, and my cross-section curve is right here. Now when I make this, right, at freeform, right, it stays consistent, then it goes up, then it starts to tip over on the side, right, and then it ends up being very tipped by the end. If I switch the style to be road-like top and preview, right, it's going to keep the top flat no matter where I am in this process. See how it looks more like a road, right? If I did road-like from the front or the right, it's going to essentially do the same thing, but it's going to try to keep it consistent in one direction. These tend to be a little bit weird unless you're doing it in a side view or something for a particular purpose. Okay? So chances are you're going to stick with road-like top as the primary one if you're looking for a road-type object where your cross-section stays flat, a ramp, a spiral, something like that. And then freeform if you want it to actually follow along with what's happening in your curve. Okay? So if I wanted this result to end up a little bit better, I could take this curve and rotate it so that it was a little bit more perpendicular to the start, something like that, and I get better results. So if I went to surface, sweep one rail, rail there. When I do that, I get less pinching in these corners. Right? So how you control where this starts can make a difference. These curves are probably a little bit tight anyway, okay, for the size of what I'm trying to sweep. Okay, so let me go back to where we had here. Now, just as before, right, I can sweep through two rails that are in 3 dimensions. So if I go to surface, sweep two rails, and pick this and this as my rail, oops, sorry, this and this, cross-section curve is there. All right, seam is fine. Now, when we're looking at this, we can see that not only does it get bigger and smaller, but it grows in the 3rd dimension, right? And it's rotating around. If I switched, right, I could rebuild, that's fine. I don't really have any options to go back to the road-like top because it's always going to be, this surface is always going to be tied between these two curves. So as they get further apart this way, the surface is always going to be tied between those. So
you can't figure out the surface.
So you can't maintain a road-like top unless your two curves keep the top flat, right? So if you had two curves that were parallel, that were always apart, they could do it, right? So if you were doing an actual road going up a piece of topography, you may draw the road width and project it down on the piece of topography, and then you could do a sweep through those two. Maybe an option. Anyway, so I know all of this was completely tangent to what we're trying to do, but I think it's important to explain what sweeps can do and can be beneficial for. So let's come all the way back to our very simple object right there, and we're going to continue working with this object, and we're going to build a few more pieces with this. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create little buttons on the ends of this object. And so I'm going to come down here to my pre-made shapes, and I'm going to go to my cylinder object. Okay? And from here, I'm going to set the base of my cylinder at the center, and my diameter is going to be 1.5 inches. So notice that I still have diameter set. If you had radius set, you'd either have to cut the value in half or pick diameter. And so my diameter is going to be 1.5. Oops, if I can type, 1.5. And my thickness here is going to be negative -1/4 inch, 0.25, because I want it to go down, not up. So we'll do negative 0.25, and it goes down. Notice that it's a nice solid little piece. Okay. I'll repeat it for this end. So once again, I'll pick the cylinder, We'll start here at the center, diameter of 1.5, and my thickness is going to be negative 0.25 inches. Okay? So I end up with kind of a little metal plate at the ends here. Okay? So once I have that, it looks like in the actual instructions I drew a curve and then extruded the curve. You could do that as well. I just saved myself the time by going straight to the cylinder. Now I'm going to take each of these two pieces, and I'm going to select them both by holding down Shift. And I'm going to copy these so that there's a gap in between them. And so I'm going to go up to the transform copy, which is also like typing in copy. And this time, because they're going in the vertical direction, I'm going to choose a vertical copy. So you see it says point to copy from or vertical. So I want it to go in vertical, which is set to yes. Point to copy from will be right here, right, just on one of the sides. And I'm going to put in a value of negative 0.75 inches. Okay? Actually, I can just put in 0.75, sorry. Oh, no, I did it. Negative 0.75. And hit enter when I'm done. And we end up with a second little copy of this cylinder down below. Okay? These have all gone in the negative direction because of how I had the geometry set up for this particular scene. In reality, I'm probably going to have to move these up vertically because they're below the C-plane. So let me go ahead and take all of my objects, and I'm going to go to Move, right, which is under Transform, and then Move. And once again, when I'm doing a move, you see I have the ability to specify that this is a vertical move. So I'm going to type V or select vertical, and then we're going to go up from here to there. And now my objects are actually sitting on top of the ground plane. Right? These ones are below the ground plane. I'm okay with that. And as you see this a little bit later on, once we start to put in the glass and whatever, it'll make sense. Basically, this is forming a clamp that's going to hold a piece of glass. Right? And there will be people that will point out that the thing that I'm making isn't actually structurally feasible because there's issues with it. That's okay. We're just trying to get some general concept of what's going on here. Okay, so I have those two. And now I'm going to rotate this object at 45 degrees so that it ends up forming an X, and I'll make a copy and do that as well. But before I do that, now would be a good time to start organizing my layers a little bit. Okay? So I'm going to come over here. I've got default layer selected, which is fine. Let's rename this, and I don't know, we could call this a clamp or a spider or something like that. Okay? Just for organizational purposes. And then I'll go ahead and I'm going to rotate these objects. So this is not a rotate 3, this is just a regular rotate. I'll select all of the objects, and I'll go to Transform, Rotate, or I'll type Rotate. And I'm going to specify the center right there to do my rotation. I'll turn ortho back on here. And in this context, I don't want to rotate a full 90. I want to rotate 45. I want to rotate somewhere in the middle. So the easiest way of doing this is to actually type in the degree value. So where before we've always jumped to the 90 degrees, this time I only want it to go to 45. So I'll type in 45, and my object will rotate. Okay? Now notice it conveniently, I set this up so that it would fit on a 1 foot by 1 foot square. Okay. But anyway, so there is the first of these diagonal clamps. Okay? I need to build a second one that goes the opposite direction. And so I have a variety of ways of doing it. Certainly I could build the whole thing from scratch again, but to me that doesn't make a lot of sense because I'd have to repeat all the steps. Right? I should probably make you do it so you'd have to have the practice of it. But I won't. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use transform and then copy to create a copy of this object. And it doesn't really matter where I click. I'll just move it over so that I have a second copy of it. Okay? Then I can take the object and I can rotate the object. So again, this time the object has to rotate basically 90 degrees from where it is. So we'll go up to transform. We'll go to rotate. We'll pick the center again. And this time I can actually just use my ortho snap because I'll go 90 degrees from where it was. And then I can move this object back. We can go from the middle and snap to the middle there. And I end up with the cross of the two objects. Okay? Now, for me, if I were doing it, and this is again kind of showing you how the efficiencies can work, when I do this kind of a thing, I would do a same thing, a copy, but instead of moving it over and then moving it back, I'd use this last option, which is in place, which makes a copy exactly on top of itself. And then while my object was still selected, I would go to rotate, select the center of the object, and type 90, and it would create the second object on top of the first. So it saves the move, but it's harder to see. And if you deselect during the process, you'll end up with two copies on top of each other, and you'll have to go through and delete. So I recommend, at your level, making the copy, doing the rotate, and then moving it back. But I at least like to kind of point that out. So I now have the base of my object here. That's going to be kind of the starting point for the rest of this. So from here, I would continue going to create a little pole that sticks out. And you can actually see the drawing on the back side of what I'm talking about here. But it's basically a 2-foot tall little pole that's going to stick straight up here and then going to have a little donut on the top of it. Okay? So if I'm going to go about building this, what I'll do is I think the easiest thing to do is to work over here kind of off to the side and then ultimately do a rotate 3D to pull it up into space. So I'll start with a polyline, and I'll go here 2 feet, like that, and I'll enter. And then I'll create the circle, and the diameter of this is still a 1/2 inch. So I'll do a 1/2 inch. There it is. I'll do a rotate 3D because before I can do the sweep, obviously I have to rotate that up in the 3rd dimension. So let me go to transform, rotate 3D, this object. And my rotation axis will be out here to the side, so it's perpendicular. My reference point will be here, and I'll fold it up so that it looks like this. And then I can once again do the sweep 1. So I'll go to surface, sweep 1 rail. There's my rail, there's my cross section, there's my seam, and there's my tube. Okay? Now, some of you are saying, well, wait a minute. That was a lot of extra steps. Couldn't you just use the cylinder option and make a cylinder that was a 1/2 inch in diameter and 2 feet tall? Sure. Right? It's the same thing. We're making the same thing. The sweeps are obviously more valuable when we have complex shapes or we want to sweep along a set of curves or something like that. Cylinder works fine for a straight object. But for the interest of practicing sweeps, I did it with a sweep. Okay? So now at the end of this object, I have a little donut that is a ring that would support a 3/8 inch diameter cable that would run through it. Okay? So I'm going to do a sweep basically by creating a couple sets of curves, and then I'll make this little donut. And so let's start with a circle tool, and I'm going to start right here at the center, and I'm going to do the first circle with a diameter of 3/8. There it is, which is distinctly smaller than the 1/2 inch tube. Okay. Now I'll do another circle with the outer diameter, which would be 1 3/4, so 1.75 inches. So there and there. Okay. So if I'm going to sweep this donut, I need a third curve, or a third circle, a cross-section curve, that goes between these two circles. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing a circle with a center and a radius, I'm going to pick one of these other options, which is a circle from diameter. Okay. So with that selected, I can snap, and at this point you should turn on your quadrant snap. There's a little checkbox, quadrant. Quadrant snaps to what would essentially be north, south, east, and west of a circle. Okay? So with quadrant snap on, I'll pick this side of the circle, and I'll pick that side of the circle. Okay? So I didn't have to know where the center of the circle was. It makes it really easy. Also, I don't have to know that this circle's diameter is 5/8 of an inch. Right? I'm just using the inner and the outer to generate. Okay? So now, once again, I can use rotate 3D. So we'll go up, whoops, sorry about that. We'll go up to transform, rotate 3D, and we'll go from quadrant to quadrant. And we'll fold from here up, and I'll end up with a cross-sectional curve and 2 circles. Okay? So now I can do a sweep 1. It makes no difference whether I pick the inner curve or the outer curve. It'll do the same thing as the rail. There's the rail, there's the cross-section, there's the seam, and there's the donut. Okay? So this is a good way of kind of testing your abilities in this. So if I were doing it, I would save a couple steps in that I would do my inside of 3/8. Let me turn on center snap here. Oh, come on. My outside would be 1.75. And when I did this diameter curve right here, and I did this to that, I would actually do this in one of the side views by referencing, whoops, it would be in the front view, my bad. Oh, come on. It's doing a terrible job of snapping. Well, I'll rotate it that way. I should be able to do it in the side view and have this show up, but it's being really finicky about my snap points. So anyway, I have the donut here. Now, I have the rod extending into the donut, so I'd like to trim that off. So I'll go up to my trim tools, which is under Edit and then Trim, or I could type Trim. I'll select this as my cutting object. I'll press Enter, and I'll get rid of that and that. And really, I'd like to get rid of that piece, and I might have to pick it from underneath. No, I got it all. So now that that's done, you can see that I have a nice intersection there and nothing hanging off on this side. So now I need to take these two pieces, there and there, and I need to move them over so that they line up on top of this shape. Okay? So I can go ahead and do a rotate 3D while I'm in position here. Rotate 3D. And we'll go from the bottom there, and we'll fold it up into the third dimension. I've left my curves behind. It doesn't make any difference at this point because I already have the geometry that I want. And then from here, I can go ahead and I can move from there to right. Come on. Let me make sure midpoint is on. There it is, midpoint. And now that comes, and those two connect together. Now, I drew this at 2 feet tall. If we look at the drawing, it's actually 2 feet from the bottom. So I need to go down another 2. I need to go down such that this lines up with a line that would go across here. So let me go ahead and generate a quick reference point line from there to there. And then let me go ahead and move this down. Now, if you end up not doing this part and you just get these two lined up, I'm still going to be very happy. Okay? So there it is in its correct position, but again, I don't need this piece of it, so I'm going to do a trim. So we'll do trim with this, and we'll go ahead and get rid of that part of the object. I'm going to get rid of that little extra part of the object as well. And in the interest of being clean, I'm going in and touching up these extra little surfaces there. And there we go. So I now have, right, this little contraption that's going to ultimately be kind of a spider clamp for a piece of glass. Okay? So I'm going to go from here, and I'm going to create the piece of glass that is a 4x6 pane, which is just simply a rectangular box. And we'll start, because I drew this curve, I can start right here in the center, and I'll say at 4 feet, 6 feet, and the thickness is going to be ½ inch, so it will be -0.5 inches. There it is. It has to go down a 1/4 inch. So let me just go ahead and move this by a 1/4 inch, and it now goes between, right, this and this. Okay? So there is a reason that I established this such that I have a piece of glass right at the center, and I have this crisscross, such that when I use this later on as a block and I repeat it, right, these will fit together. So let me go ahead and show you how this works. Let me change this to layer 0 so that this is now glass. And I can actually delete these other things so that they're not confusing. So now I have this object. Okay, I have the glass and I have the clamp. If I were to use this to make a wall, I'm just copying it over here. Let me rotate it so that it's up in the vertical direction. So rotate 3D. And we'll go right here, there. Right, so it's in 3D. And then I can go ahead and I can array this object. I don't know, we'll do 10 in the X direction, none in the Y, 1 in the Y, and 10 in the Z direction. My X spacing will be from here to there. And my Z spacing will be from... This is not something that you have to do. I'm just trying to show you how this works together. Okay? And I'll press Enter to accept. And lo and behold, I can end up creating this whole glass wall with all of these little clamps. Okay? Looks like I missed the little rod. Let me go ahead and do that rod really fast so you can see it with its spines. All right, come on, center. This was 3/8, and this was 6 feet. And this, we need to array it. 10, 1, 10. Now we'll just do 4 feet and 6 feet. And there they all are. All right, so you can kind of see that as a whole big glass curtain wall of some kind. Okay? So obviously I don't have materials applied or anything like that yet. What I want you to do is I want you to concentrate on getting this geometry put together, and then go ahead and assign materials to these objects. You're welcome to choose glass as a material for the glass. You might get better results out of skyscraper glass than just regular glass that's in your materials library. The truth is that neither one is going to turn out particularly well because we have no environment or context to render in. In terms of the metal for the brackets, it's anything that you feel like you want. I want you to upload your assignment, your exercise by the end of class. And it looks like at the bottom I say if you finish early, you can begin working on assignment 201. I haven't given you assignment 201 yet, so you can't really start working on it. I will give that to you after when you get back from break. I don't want you to have to stress out about it over break. Fair enough? Global question or individual? Okay. All right.